Well, good morning, church family, or good evening whenever you're watching this message. Um, I am really getting tired of preaching sermons and teaching classes in the face of a camera. It's getting really old, but at the same time, I am praying for all of you that we remain safe and we remain healthy. I'm just missing everybody. And I know that everybody is missing everybody, and that we're getting tired of being holed up in our homes with our crazy kids, if you have kids, or just whatever's going on. And I just want to acknowledge that this is a tough time. But anyways, before Easter, we started a series called Love One Another, and the main thing that we were trying to do is we were trying to look at the idea of the fact that we are stuck in our homes, we're stuck away from each other, and my hope was that we could come back after all of this time alone and be better at loving people. And so that's what I want to continue and finish this morning or this evening whenever you're watching this. So before Easter, we were talking about loving one another, and the first thing that we looked at was the story of Matthew. And Matthew, of course, was the tax collector that Jesus called. And everybody was very worried that Jesus was sitting here and conversing and eating with tax collectors and with sinners, and with all these terrible people. And Jesus made an incredible statement where he said, "I did not come to call the righteous. I came for the sinners. I did not come for the healthy people. I came for the sick people." And so we basically came to the conclusion that Jesus loved sinners. Therefore, so should we. We should also love sinners. And then the second week, we looked at our supernatural response to enemies. And this is really one of the hardest things to do as a follower of Jesus, which is to respond to our enemies with blessing, to pray for them, to not retaliate, to give up our right to be insulted, and to give freely to those who are taking from us forcibly. And ultimately, the goal is to treat others the way that we want to be treated, even when they are treating us in an evil way. And we pointed out that the only way that we can do this is if we drink deeply from the Father's love for us that we experience through Jesus. But when we love sinners, when we love our enemies, we inevitably come to a point of tension. And the tension is, what do we do about the sin? What do we do about the fact that he's looking at porn? What do we do about the fact that she's having an affair? What do we do about the fact that they're living together without being married? What do we do about the fact that he's a liar, that he's an alcoholic, or she's a drug addict? What do we do about the fact that they injured us, or they have injured or hurt some other person? You see, do you catch the tension? Do we accept them? Do we just invite people like that into our lives, into our churches, into our families? Or is there something else that we should do? What do we do about the sin? And I just want to be very clear at the outset of this message that I'm not encouraging you to make yourself vulnerable to a predator or an abuser. That if somebody is a predator or an abuser, it requires a different path than what I'm going to share with you this morning. I'm not saying we shouldn't love them, but there is a different path for somebody who has that struggle in their lives. So what do we do about the sin? What do we do about the sin? I want you to just hold that thought. I want you to let that tension just kind of marinate in you for a minute. Let it ferment a little bit. And while it's sitting there, I want to turn your attention to another question. And the question is this: what steals love away? What steals love away? Have you ever walked into a room and you could just feel that the love was gone? There ain't no love in this place. You can just see it. You can see the nervous glances, maybe the glaring eyes or the tears or the red face, and you know that the love is gone. You know, I've walked into rooms like this where my kids, there's crying and there's anger and there's frustration. And the question is, well, what steals love away? What steals love away? And obviously one of the things is anger. Anger steals love away. Anger squelches love. Anger replaces love oftentimes. Can you think of a person in your life that you were very close to, and then the relationship ended badly? Can you think of somebody like that? Maybe you need to pause the message right here, especially if you're watching this alone, and you just need to think about this for a moment. Is there a relationship that has ended badly in my life, and what happened? What was the anger? Have you ever stopped to think about why people get angry? You ever stopped to think about that? Have you ever stopped to think about why you get angry? And the reason that I've noticed, for the most part, it's not always this way, but for the most part, rejection causes anger. If you think about this in the Bible, this happens quite often. Cain, God rejected Cain's sacrifice, and so Cain got angry and killed his brother Abel. Jonah's opinion about Nineveh, about the Ninevites, that they should die, that they should pay for their terrible lives and what they had done. Jonah's opinion was rejected, and so Jonah got angry. Saul was rejected by the people. He had his thousands, but David had his 10,000s, right? And so Saul became angry. Joseph's brothers, they were rejected by their father. Their father gave their brother Joseph a coat of many colors and basically said, "You're my favorite son." And so Joseph's brothers became angry because they were rejected. And if you stop to think about it for a moment, and you just start to kind of process the moments that you were most angry in your life, oftentimes it was because you or something that you loved was rejected. You got fired. People didn't like your idea. Your opinion was ignored. For preachers, somebody didn't like something that I said in my sermon, and so I was rejected. She chose him, or he chose her, or he divorced me, or that person got promoted and I got rejected. Sometimes it's even our sense of justice. If we see injustice in the world, our sense of justice is being rejected. Therefore, we become angry because our justice is being rejected. And anger is not always a bad thing. But anger often replaces love, even when we have righteous anger. Now, if you're tracking with me, I want to take this one step further. If rejection is one of the main reasons or main causes for you to be angry, then it's no wonder that so many people in this world become angry with the church. Because oftentimes we reject them. Of course, we tell them that we love them, but in the midst of telling them that we love them, we reject them at the same time. We tell them that if they are going to belong with us, they are going to have to leave their lives of debauchery or their life of adultery or the relationship that dishonors God, or they're going to have to quit the drug, or they're have to quit drinking alcohol, or they're going to have to set these things right before they belong with us. And we wonder why people become so angry with us, and we wonder why people feel rejected by us. And we think, well, they became angry, but I planted a seed. Right? I planted a seed. And so here again we come back to this tension. If we are going to love people and accept them, what do we do with the sin? And I think the only place we can go for our answer to this question is the life and the ministry of Jesus. I mean, where do we find Jesus? In Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13, after he called Matthew to follow him. Do we find him pulling Matthew aside and saying, "You sorry, good-for-nothing tax collector, stop doing that stuff. Do you realize that you're making money off the misfortunes of your own people? Do you realize that?" Does he tell him to go get new friends? No, he doesn't do that. Instead, we find Jesus sitting presumably with Matthew's tax collector's friends and his sinner friends, and having to defend himself against the accusations of the Pharisees. And again, Jesus tells them straight up, "I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." In Matthew chapter 11, we find Jesus contrasting himself with John the Baptist, and he says, John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking, yet people said that he has a demon. But then the Son of Man, in other words, me, Jesus, I came eating and drinking, and they say, here's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And what we see with Jesus is that he is friends with the rejects of the society. He is friends with the people who are sinners. And Jesus explains why we find him here in Luke chapter 15, which is where we're going to wrap up this message. So in Luke chapter 15, we find three parables. We read one already earlier. But remember that a parable is basically a story that every person in the audience of Jesus understands, and then he throws a heavenly truth alongside that parable that is not as easy to understand. And he tries to explain things this way quite often in his ministry. And so in Luke chapter 15, we find three parables. And Luke is really straightforward. He tells us exactly why he is telling these parables. I love Luke because Luke is just a little bit easier to understand. And so Luke, here at the beginning, he lets us know exactly why Jesus is telling this parable. So in Luke chapter 15, starting in verses 1 and 2, we read this. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So again, Luke tells us that Jesus is hanging around with all these terrible sinners, all these horrible people that the Pharisees and tax collectors are complaining that he's associating with them. And so Jesus tells these stories because of this criticism of him. So the first story that he tells is about a shepherd that has lost a sheep. And the shepherd goes and he leaves the other 99 people and the other 99 sheep, and he goes and he looks for this sheep. And look at what happens in verses 6 and 7 when he finds the sheep. When he arrives, in other words, with this sheep on his shoulders, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed. Isn't that a beautiful picture? And Jesus is telling us why we find him with the sinners. That we're learning from Jesus himself. He's telling stories that helps people like you and me understand why we find Jesus with these sinners. Then he tells a story about a lost coin. A woman has 10 silver coins, and she loses one, and she tears her house apart looking for it. I mean, she literally disrupts her entire day looking for this coin. And then when she finds it, look at what happens. Verses 9 and 10. And when she finds it, she will call her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. Wow, this is such a beautiful picture. And then Jesus again tells another story about an actual lost person. The parable of the lost son that we have read already. And so just to remind you of the story, the younger son insults his father. He asks his father for his inheritance. He takes off and he squanders the wealth, and the wealth, it lasts for a little while, and he spends it on prostitutes and gambling. I mean, we don't know exactly what all he spends it on, but he spends it on wild living, and then it's gone, and then a famine hits, and the son gets a job feeding pigs, and he's so hungry that he's looking at the pig food, and he's longing to fill his belly with this pig food. And suddenly he comes to his senses. Look at verse 17. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. And so the son goes to his father. And this is my favorite verse in the whole story. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, this is verse 20, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son and embraced him and kissed him. This is such a beautiful picture, right? And then his dad throws a party for him. He puts a robe on him. He puts a ring on his fingers. He gives him sandals for his feet, and he kills the fattened calf, and he says, come on, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate. And then the older brother comes in from the fields, and he finds out what's going on. And his response is not completely unexpected, but it reveals another twist in the story. Look at verse 28. The older brother was angry, and he wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you, but never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. And his father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed with me and by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. You see, there are actually two lost sons in this parable. The problem is that one knows that he is lost, and the other does not. So why did Jesus come? Well, the reason that he came is he came for the people who don't go to church. He came for the people who have left the Father's house. He came for the people who have squandered the blessings that he has given them. And inevitably, churches often digress to the point where church becomes all about the church people and not about the lost people. So what do we do with the sin? What do we do with the sin? And I believe Jesus gives us the answer, but it's not the answer that we want. You see, we open the door to transformation with loving and belonging. In John chapter 16, Jesus promises that the Spirit is going to come into the world and that He, the Spirit, will convict the world of sin and righteousness and judgment. You see, we see this with Jesus' own disciples. He invites people into his presence. He invites people into his belonging group. And it's after they know they belong that they begin to change and transformation begins to happen. You see, what our job is when it comes to the sin of people is our job is to get people into the vicinity of Jesus and into the vicinity of the Spirit through love of them. Our job is to make sure that they know that they belong with us, that we are here for them, that we love them. And when they know that they belong with us, when they know that they are loved by us, that's when we can begin to talk about what they believe, and that is when their behavior begins to be transformed. You see, oftentimes we get this backwards. We make people believe that they have to change their behavior before they belong with us. But Jesus actually did it the opposite way. He made sure that people knew they belonged with him. And it was then that he could begin to talk to them about what they believed. And when they could talk about what they believed, about who he was, the Messiah, the Savior, that is when behavior began to change. And that is when sin was overcome. So if we believe that the Spirit can actually convict people of sin, then our main goal must be to bring people in and get them to the place where they can be transformed by the power of the Spirit. But Friends, let's go out and love people the best that we can. Be blessed.